Housing Minister James Browne has downplayed a claim that it could take 15 years to end the housing crisis, despite the analysis coming from the Department of Finance. A mapping exercise was published yesterday and it forecast the housing shortage is likely to persist into the 2040s until the increase in building catches up with demand. I'm joined by Fine Gael TD Naoise Muirí, Social Democrat TD Sinéad Gibney, Executive Editor with the Irish Independent Kevin Doyle, and a solicitor specialising in planning and environmental law, Fred Logue. You can send us your comments. Simply scan the QR code or contact us via the WhatsApp number. Naoise, this is pretty damning indictment of housing policy, isn't it?
No, I think it's a useful exercise to do by the department. They do a whole series of scenarios. They model up a set of scenarios, lots of assumptions, etc. For, as you say, laying it out to 2065. It's certainly worth doing. I mean, you can pick any one scenario and say, well, that will happen or that won't happen. Do you know, it could actually effectively be worse than that. We don't know in terms of what happens. But I think it's a useful exercise, but it's a desk exercise effectively. But I mean, the government, I'm a backbencher, the government is very focused now on housing policy and just getting building going, and supply measures in particular.
Yeah. But housing policy is a desk exercise as well. You can't dismiss this as a desk exercise when, I mean, housing plans are exactly that. They're desk exercises.
Housing policy has to be brought to life. Nothing will get built if you don't bring housing policy to life.
But they begin their life as a desk exercise, which is exactly what this is.
Yes, but the difference
and it is damning.
Yeah.
I mean, even the best case scenario in it is pretty damning, isn't it?
Well, listen, we can all look out to 2065 and beyond. You can pick whatever set of scenarios you want. This happens all the time. You can do that. I suppose like the government, I support the government. I'm a member of party of government. You know, I prioritise at every parliamentary party meeting that I'm at the importance of housing and measures that we can do to try and bring up the supply of housing. Not enough discussion happens around the supply in this country. So lots of other measures. Supply is absolutely vital. We can't wait till 2065. Let's not kid ourselves. There's an awful lot to be done.
So do you have faith that we'll beat the projections in this plan? What this plan says is likely to happen, that it's likely to take until 2040?
Like, I have faith that if we put our shoulders to the wheel and try and clear out bureaucracy, you know, and implement effective measures in the short term, we will be in much better position in a year's time, in 2 years' time, in 3 years' time. And we'll see a trajectory and a direction of travel that is really heading in the right direction. That's what we can't wait till 2065.
Sinead, are you as hopeful?
No. And I think it's pretty depressing reading and headlines for particularly, you know, the people who are watching tonight in their 20s, 30s and 40s from their box room in their family home and who can't buy homes. I think that for them to recognise that we are 15 years into a crisis of Fine Gael's own admission and possibly facing another 15 years before we even see the light to get out of it. So no, I think it's pretty grim reading and pretty grim analysis, and to suggest that we need to get building when we've been entrenched in this crisis for so long is really just that sounds like spin to me. Like
are you not encouraged at all by the fact that this government is spending more on housing than previous governments?
Well, no, because we're not seeing the results. I mean, you know, we're spending more on housing, but where is it going? It seems to be going towards developers, subsidies for developers who are just earning more and more. You know, they're paying to their shareholders, but we're not seeing it translate into houses, and we're certainly not seeing it translate into the affordable and social houses which we have put front and centre in any of our housing policies, and we're certainly not seeing it turn into home ownership for the generations younger than me, who are really, as I say, you know, in very difficult situations. You know, people have just put their lives on hold. People don't get to start families, take up the jobs they want to do. People don't get to live the lives that they had planned to live because they can't access housing. So I don't think, you know, the suggestion that clearing red tape or getting building, those kinds of phrases, like for me, I don't see how. It just shows to me there's no humility with this government in terms of where they're at with housing or leadership, because it's clear that what they're doing is not working. And yet even, you know, the Housing Commission stated that we need to see a radical reshift of policy. That has not happened. The government has continued to double down on its same priority and focus on private sector solutions which are just not working and not delivering for people.
I don't accept the charge of no humility. I mean, like today we were in the Dáil, we were debating a bill putting 1.5 billion into the ESB to do with the ESB's network, upgrading the ESB's network so that, you know, housing estates, apartments, new dwellings can get onto that network. 1.5 billion going into that. And then, you know, the ability for the ESB to borrow up to 17 billion in capital to build out that network. That's just part of it. investment going into
That's not
Irish water.
humility.
No,
but I know. But where is this charge of humility coming from?
Well, she said it. You rejected it. Why?
Yeah,
Give me an example of humility on behalf of the government.
Well,
if I could explain a bit more what I mean. What I mean is that there's no admission that you're getting it wrong. Even when your own institutions and bodies and reports and analysis are telling you you're getting it wrong, you're still not admitting to that, and you're rejecting solutions that are being put forward by every single opposition party, including our own, and suggesting constantly that we don't put forward solutions. So that's what I mean by humility. I mean admitting that you have really created a crisis, a multi-generational crisis for housing in this country, and your solutions are not working.
Yeah, I don't like the humility. I don't know what you want me to say about humility. I think, in our parliamentary party,
I just want you to explain. You're the one who picked it up.
Yeah.
Sinead said lots of things. It was the charge of humility that you rejected.
But what are we looking for? Humility. I mean, we're all getting on with our work. Do you know what I mean? What is it that you're missing in terms of humility?
Well, just exactly as I've said, that there's an admission from the government that you have failed and that you should listen to others who are putting forward solutions instead of the blasé way in which your government dismisses us as opposition TDs who are putting forward solutions, experts who have become so expert in this area because of the crisis perpetuating for so long, and you refuse to say that you've got it wrong.
OK, so I hear, for example, from the Social Democrats state building company as a policy. I don't think that's realistic. The idea that we just put together a big state company now and start building loads of... I don't even know where you would get the construction capacity. So, I mean, we're entitled to have views. Everybody's entitled to have views in a debate on housing policy. I think the government is actually doing... is trying and... some level of success in terms of measures. We talk the extension of the ERPZ across the country, market pricing of new tenancies from March 2026, trying to streamline design standards. The industry is saying that design standards need to change so that they can be built more efficiently and close that affordability gap. They're all good measures that we have to try and continue developing the policy framework.
Where is the new policy? We were told this new housing plan was coming in the summer in June, and then it was going to be July, and then it was going to be August, and then it was going to be... You don't need me to keep reading out the months of the year, but we're in November.
So as I understand it, it's coming in the next 2 weeks. But I mean, I'm not writing the policy. I'm very looking forward myself to seeing... Do
you know why it's taken so long when we were promised it so much earlier?
Well, I'm not involved in it directly, but it is it's a complex area. There's an awful lot of moving parts. It's worth getting right and worth getting on with it then.
Kevin, what's the talk behind the scenes as to why it has taken so long when we were promised it in the middle of the summer?
Well, I think it's the first point to say is that we're actually 15 years into a housing crisis. So we're talking about it going on for another 15, but this housing crisis started with ghost estates and it's reinvented itself over and over those years, and now we're in a different phase, and in 15 years' time it sounds like we'll be in a different phase. It may not look like the housing crisis we have today with the box rooms. It'll be some other version of it probably. Why is it taking so long? Well, I think there's quite a lot of bafflement about why it's taken so long, Kieran, because it's almost a year. We're coming up on a year since the general election. Obviously, it took a little while over Christmas for the government to form, and James Browne was the surprise package as the Minister for Housing. He says today that he thinks he can solve this in his term. Well, a year of it is gone, is the truth, and we haven't seen a plan yet. So obviously there have been measures over that period. Let's not pretend he hasn't been doing anything. You know, we've seen things around VAT, we've seen talk around modular homes and back gardens and changes around apartments and things like that. So he has been doing things that are not necessarily in a plan that's going to get published in 2 weeks' time. But we've seen this talk even within Fianna Fáil, where... and the annoyance going on at Fianna Fáil, some in the party who are trying to be a little bit more highbrow about why they're annoyed at Micheál Martin are making points like we haven't made any tangible progress that we can show people on housing in the last year. So even within Fianna Fáil, there's annoyance that it's taken so long.
Well, one of the things that he has talked about as well in terms of policy in advance of the plan being published is an overhaul of how the judicial review system works. Have we got any sense of what that overhaul might look like, what he's talking about?
Well, I mean, it comes up from time to time as another one of the blockages, and we hear this idea that there are all these blockages, and judicial reviews is cited. And I think there is some divergence across the Dáil as to how big of an issue that is, because some believe that's just one element, a distraction. Yes, it happens and everybody's entitled to take a court case. Others would argue that the whole thing gets tied up in too much process, that the rules should be tightened up so that basically the the planning applications are processed properly, and therefore there are no grounds for judicial reviews, and therefore that wouldn't be an issue. So we'll have to see exactly what comes forward in terms of how you tighten that without restricting people's democracy, but that's what's being debated.
And Fred, you're something of an expert working in this area. So what's the point of the judicial review system we have? How is it meant to work? And is the opprobrium fitting?
Well, the judicial review is part of a system, a planning system. So I don't think anyone would say that we shouldn't have a planning system. And the planning system is there to basically ensure that there's a high degree of coordination amongst different stakeholders so that we get good quality and quantity of development. And that includes local communities, developers, landowners and local authorities. So delivering housing is complex. So we need to have a plan, and we need to stick to the plan and implement the plan. So what happens is that with judicial review is a democratic check on whether or not the legal requirements for development have been met and the environment is protected. And I can say to you and your listeners now, right now, there is virtually no housing litigation. So there was a period with the strategic housing development system, which came in actually 9 years ago, which under a previous housing policy, Housing for All, which was supposed to be a fast-track solution to the housing crisis, which actually precipitated the almost collapse of An Bord Pleanála. So, tinkering with the planning system is not going to fix it. And in fact, as we've seen in the past, it could make it actually make it worse.
So would it be your contention that people who point the finger at judicial reviews, that it's something of a distraction?
It's a distraction, but it's a very worrying distraction because the people who are saying it are echoing Nigel Farage and Donald Trump. So we're talking ourselves into autocracy here by taking away people's rights. And what
do you say? I'm sorry, Fred. But what do you say then to people who watch this and maybe their understanding or their view of how the judicial review system works is that it allows people to object to development, be it housing development or other strategic infrastructure, who've got nothing to do with it, and their view would be, we should be limiting it to people who are impacted.
Well, that's just not true, actually. So basically, by and large, to take a judicial review, you have to have already made observations at the planning stage. And 99.99% of people make observations are local people who live near development. So there's just no truth to the claim that there's these kind of roving serial objectors who are popping up at random out of nowhere to object to development and take judicial reviews. That's just the bogeyman. It's just been put up there to discredit the system. And again, it's very undemocratic with the executive thrashing the judicial system. We have separation of powers in this state.
There is the odd serial objector, though, isn't there?
No, well, there aren't, actually, no. So actually, some of the serial litigants are actually developers themselves. Yeah. And some of the loudest critics of judicial review are the ones that are taking judicial reviews to meet their own objectives. Okay. So it's a system that's there, and I don't begrudge that. Yeah. But if they can't criticise other people for taking litigation when they're actually doing the same thing.
I don't want to bring people into the debate who aren't here to defend themselves, but there certainly have been, pieces written in newspapers, and there's been reporting of individuals who have taken a number of judicial reviews against developments around the country. You said that's just simply not the case. That hasn't happened.
Well, there's one individual who's not here to defend himself. Yeah. But that is kind of a historic artefact of the fact that our litigation system is so hostile that it was only very resilient people who could actually take these cases. So these one or two individuals were the people with the constitution to litigate. But now things are there's much more level playing field. So the people who are taking these cases are now the ones that are affected by them.
Naoise, we're going to waste our time then carrying out this review of the judicial review system when it's unnecessary.
So Fred makes a point, though, that there's no housing litigation tied up, no housing schemes tied up in litigation. I don't know whether there are or not. I'll take him at his word. But the Greater Dublin Drainage System scheme, which is, I first became aware of it 2012 as a councillor, on the north side. That's now tied up again in a judicial review, as I understand it, based on... Can I just finish my point? Tied up at the moment in review again. And that's one step away from housing, because that scheme is needed for provision of housing and for treatment of wastewater from housing. So, we have to be straight up about this. That's a scheme. I mean, what's going on there?
Well, there's 2 points to make in that. First of all, nobody has ever talked to the person who actually took the first judicial review. I know her, and I've spoken to her. And she has said that for the first iteration of that project, it took 14 years for permitting and 6 months for the judicial review. Six years at pre-planning between Fingal County Council and on board Penala, with 1 meeting per year. So, you know, people are throwing out these fact-free comments.
So you're saying it's not judicial review, but it's something else. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's a permitting system. So that's in the hands of the developer and the institution. And then with a big project like the drainage scheme, it doesn't start work the day after you get planning permission. There's years and years of work to do in terms of procurement, detailed design. So while that can go on in parallel with the judicial review. So the judicial review, in reality, doesn't delay anything for big infrastructure projects.
Like the project is sitting there, it hasn't, you know, that may well be the case, but like I'm aware of the project for a long time and it hasn't happened. Judicial review has certainly been a part of it.
Well, it was never going to start the day after confirmation.
I suppose it all comes to an issue of confidence as well in terms of processes. And like, you know, that's a project that is badly needed for housing, directly for housing, for the north side and for further afield.
Sinead, do you accept that there are procedural overhauls that might hasten the delivery of housing?
I mean, certainly around the judicial review piece and planning generally, I find it quite baffling that we're still talking about that when we had a piece of legislation that was the third biggest piece of legislation in the history of the state that was trumpeted by the government in its last term. It was 1,000 pages long. It was going to be a seismic overhaul of the planning system. And apparently it's now the bogeyman. You know, that is stopping the government.
The ink wasn't even dry on that.
Yeah.
And Darrell O'Brien was kind of distancing himself, saying, oh, yeah, no, that was actually phase one of the planning overhaul.
Well, I think we need to activate it. It hasn't been fully activated yet. Let's activate all of it and let's see where we end up.
But how did government get it so wrong to proceed with a piece of legislation as dense and as complicated as that and acknowledging almost immediately that there were shortcomings in it and they'd need to revisit it?
Well, I think it needs to be activated. I think there is a view out there that parts of it will be challenged and maybe some are not happy to proceed it on. Let's get it out there. Let's get it activated. And if it's going to be challenged in the courts, we need to do it.
What do you say then to the perception that exists out there that, well, simply put, you just don't know what you're doing when it comes to housing? You know, that Housing for All was just the latest iteration of a housing plan that has failed to deliver on the promise, and that this is just another example of it. That the planning bill that was meant to iron out all of these kinks in the system, like I say, the ink wasn't even dry, and there was an acknowledgement that actually there was loads of other kinks in the system that were going to have to be ironed out with a whole other piece of legislation. There's a sense that you guys don't have a clue.
I think that legislation should be activated. It should be activated. And if it's going to be tested, let's test it. And let's see where the issues are.
And the fact that successive housing policies and housing plans have failed to meet targets and failed to deliver, we should just accept that the next one will be different, is it?
No. I'm saying, like, from my perspective, as a backbencher in this government, there's a huge amount of effort and energy going into housing, into planning. I mean, during, for example, infrastructure, we campaigned for a Department of Infrastructure in the general election. We didn't get it, but there is a unit within Deeper now that is looking at infrastructure. There's a task force looking at infrastructure to try and speed up the delivery of all those pieces of infrastructure, all the money that's gone into Irish Water. This is all stuff that hasn't happened before.
Sinead Gibney, I rudely interrupted you there when we had to take an ad break, but a point you wanted to make about housing policy and housing plans.
Yeah, and I guess it's just picking up on some of the language that Naoise used there, saying, you know, I'm a backbencher and I can see that there's a real focus on it by this government. But there have been backbenchers saying that for 15 years. Like, that's my issue, is that there is nothing changing and there is a continued spin and just, you know, kind of this narrative about, no, it's all good, we have it in hand, it's all fine and everything's working and the next thing is going to be the game changer. And nothing is the game changer. And again, what we have seen is advice that there needs to be a radical shift. I mean, our message is quite simple. We need to build state houses on state land with state resources. There has to be, within any housing policy, an absolute central and focus on affordable housing within that.
Where will all the labour come from? All the jobs.
But like, I mean, like, this is the point. Like, if you throw out these, like, you know, these bits, like, the point is, like, you're not taking that at face value. Do you know what I mean? Like, you have relied on market.
It's a legitimate question.
Yeah, but I mean,
the tradesmen and women the labourers,
We
the
employ
professionals.
them in a state construction company, which you dismissed
from where
earlier.
then?
From Ireland, and we bring them in. And then, of course, we have the issue that we've nowhere to put them because we don't have any housing to put people in at the moment. So we have created a circular issue.
So you'll bring them in, but you'll have nowhere to put them. Like, what are you proposing? You're proposing a state building company which is going to compete.
Instead of spending money lining the pockets of developers, which is what this government has done for decades now.
What did you do in the last?
Entirely
reject that.
Budget, what did you do?
No. I'm talking about this government.
So that VAT on flats, like, where is that going? That is going into the pockets of developers who've already built the flats. You're not even incentivising them. It's not going to build one single more dwelling.
Can I just make a quick comment?
Absolutely.
Like, thank you. From my personal, I've been very clear personally on this. This is about affordability. That VAT change is about trying to close the affordability gap for apartments to make them. Like, Sinead is right. We don't know. We're not guaranteed that it'll end up, reducing the price. But it's a measure it's a measure worth doing.
But shouldn't we be at a point where you, as a government, 15 years into this crisis, should have measures that will?
I'm not going to say I'm a backbencher TD again.
And beside the point, like the flats that we're building, like I'm in Stillorgan, and we have just a proliferation of buy-to-let. We are still freezing out generations from home ownership. So your solutions, even if they worked, are not actually tackling the housing crisis in the way that people need it to be tackled. Because you're not providing homes for people to buy and live in.
Like, the apartment design standards are targeted at apartments for
purchase. But
Homes
for All has not delivered the housing that you said it was going to deliver. Your targets are not meeting the targets year on year. The central bank has downgraded this year's forecast down to 32 and saying that next year's is going to be nothing more spectacular, barely touching 35.
The plan coming in 2 weeks' time? Like, will you guys assess that?
But this is my point, is like the plans are coming in again and again and again, and they're not changing anything. Nothing you're doing is working.
OK, so...
Fred, in terms of other aspects of the system, I mean, you dealt with judicial reviews and you're viewing them and your experience, and somebody's after getting in touch here. I work at the coalface in a local planning authority. Planning legislation is an utter mess. New Planning Act is useless in addressing problems. Now, they say judicial reviews being used by NIMBY culture, and like I say, you've talked about that, addressed that issue. But the idea that the Planning Act is useless, I mean, what's your experience of it, of whether the system we have is fit for purpose and the problems actually lie elsewhere? Or is there merit, despite the fact that the last government tried to do this, is there merit in actually revisiting the system?
Well, first thing is we've had the same planning system for 60 years in this country. So we've had more or less the same structure where the planning application goes in, people make observations, and there's a decision. And since the 70s, we've had on board Panola, and that was to depoliticise the planning system. So the system is fit for purpose. The problem with it is the constant change. So I feel for the people who work in the local authorities, because they constantly have to be dealing with changes to the legislation. So this constant twiddling of the legislation by the Department of Housing primarily, which is subject to incessant lobbying as far as I can see, is causing havoc in the system. And every time something changes, it causes uncertainty, it causes mistakes in decisions, and then it gives opportunities for litigation to clarify what that is. So in the middle of a crisis, we took our planning code from 2000 and we completely rewrote it. So it's like in the middle of a raging crisis, we binned what we had and brought in something completely new that nobody knows, that nobody really understands, and will cause a huge amount of confusion, it'll cause errors, and it will cause conflict. So what I think is the government should declare a moratorium on changing the planning system. Stick with what we have. There are very simple things we can do, actually, to make things better. We can bring in more public participation at the very earliest stages before a plan goes in. We can have alternative dispute resolution or mediation to resolve local issues. We're reforming the planning system again, and we're way behind on our renewable energy directive implementation, which is really important for renewable energy. We're forgetting about that. So I think the government needs to focus on what's actually important in terms of legislation, and to just back away from meddling with the planning system because it causes
Sinead, I know you want to jump in, but the good news is, if the Department of Finance are right, we have 15 more years to talking about this. So
but just one thing, it's just
go
more
on,
resources.
very quickly.
Just more resources. We need more planners in local authorities, and we need more judges
a bit of stability in the system.
Well,